Younger on item 1, please. If you'd like to come forward, sir, you'll present the item and then you can comment.
It's not on there,
The application site you can see outlined in red, on the screen. It's backplanned insofar as it relates to number 59, Titchfield Park Road, which is here on the west or the left-hand side of the screen. The access itself, though, comes off of Brownwick Close to the north, which is sort of the shorter, stubby leg of the T shape of the application site, and you'll see from the photographs in a moment. At the moment, that's an area laid to lawn, sitting at the southern end of the turning head off of Brownwick Close. The properties in Fernway sit to the south of the site, principally two-storey, on this side of the road. It does got to some rooms in the roof as you go further to the east. And the properties in Brownwick are two-storey as well. So moving into the application site itself, you get a feel for the proposed site layout in a little bit more detail now. You'll see from the report the proposal before you is for a two-bedroom bungalow, and you'll see from the commentary in the report I've described it as effectively being made up of two modules. You've got the module on the east, which is this smaller one. It just steps in from the larger element to the west. This is the single-storey flat-roofed element, finished with timber boarding on its elevational treatment. And then the slightly larger module to the west is the element that's finished with its render, the clay brick chimney you can see on this northern side, and the monopitch roof, which will have a slate finish and pitches up to a finished height on the western end of 5.1 metres. This is the tree off-site in number 5, Fernway. You can see 5 there, and the fact the trunk sits just off-site. And this is the tree that's previously been referred to in the historic reasons for refusal. And you can see the relationship here as well between the short garden to number 35, Brownwick Close, where the access comes in. So the layout is very much geared to the primary living space. You'll see from the elevations there's plenty of fenestration here, full height glazing along the lounge, and there's some windows also above the kitchen at high level and the entrance hall. Opening out onto that western garden, but one of the points you'll see from the report is there's also a facility to use a small eastern garden that's included in the proposals for bedroom number 1 now, and that's to help mitigate the impact on the tree from the previous scheme. So moving to the architecture itself, the top drawing is that that will face northwards. So you'll see this as you come to the site itself. Timber boarding I mentioned on the flat roofed module of the building, which also contains the entrance door with its window surround. And then as it heads towards the western side of the site, that monopitch roof finished with slate, cream render, and the brick chimney. The south elevation described here as the back elevation. This is the elevation that will sit adjacent to and parallel to the properties in Fernway. So again, you can see the simple treatment of boarding and render, and fenestration is simply kept at single-storey level. The side elevation here is the western side. This is where I mentioned using that full height glazing to try and maximise light into the living area and the kitchen area. And then to the eastern side I mentioned some high level windows over the entrance hall and the kitchen area. Those are these windows, and then the 2 bedroom windows and doors that will serve the eastern part of the site. So taking through the photographs, reference page, if that's useful for you, is page 22 of your agenda, which is your ordnance survey site plan. This is looking southwards down Brownwick Close from effectively where it branches and heads north to south. This is effectively outside number 24, looking down in towards the application site, which sits just to the middle of the photograph in the distance beyond the red car. This is number 35 Brownwick Close, sitting on the left-hand side, and the properties you can see in the rear distance of the photograph are those in Fernway. As we move closer to the site, you get a feel for that turning head I mentioned right at the start. The area later grass is the area that was hatched orange, the shorter stub of the T-shaped site plan, and you go beyond that Harris fencing into the application site, which is where the photographer is now, looking back in the eastwards direction. So this is number 35 Brownwick Close off to the left-hand side, and the gable of 34, its neighbour. and then the boundary fence running along the eastern boundary. Turning on the same spot, and I'll do a panoramic sort of rotation around the site from the access point, we start to get a feel for the properties excuse me, in Fern Way. And the greenhouse is on the application site, so they're easy to go, and it's in approximately this location where there's some disturbed earth, and the greenhouses is where the proposed dwelling will sit, with its sort of eastern garden sat in that far corner, essentially in the photograph. Turning around, facing almost directly south now, looking back to Fern Way. This is number 7. You'll see from the report number 7, previously there was concern about the impact on number 7, specifically its garden, and an overbearing impact on the garden of number 7. 9, 11, and we just get the gable of number 5, and that's where the protected tree is. We'll see that in a minute. But for reference points, the proposed dwelling sitting essentially in the photograph, its highest point, the monopitched rendered module of the building, and its 5.1 metre high finish, will sit approximately in line with the shed in number 7. So then the roof sort of pitching down in this location to its single-storey module, sitting where the greenhouses are. Turning around, looking sort of southwesterly now, this is the oak tree in question. This is number 5, Fern Way. This is the shed in number 7 I mentioned previously. So we turn around to look at the garden, the western garden for the application site. This is the garden area in question, with the parking proposed now, perfectly on the immediate foreground on the right-hand side, and you can see the closed bordered fence which subdivides the garden to number 59 Titchfield Park Road in the distance here. And this is just moving back to the very eastern boundary and looking back and giving you a view of the site as a whole. Previously I stood in front of the Harris fencing rotating around, but it gives you a bit more of a feel for the site as it is and how it relates to those properties. And I have nothing else, Chairman, unless there are questions later. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Respected committee members, my name is Bala and I'm from 35 Brentwick Close. I strongly object this planning recommendation in view of the following points, some of which I believe may not have been taken into consideration. Firstly, the distance between the rear side of our house and the proposed bungalow is only 10.5 meters. This is far less from the minimum recommended 12 meter as per the Fareham Borough Council guidelines, and this clearly contravenes that. I've taken photographs from the rear side of our garden for the committee members to kindly have a look. I also measured the distance between the rear side of our house and the edge of the garden, and that is 5.5 meters. The planning application highlights that they omitted the carport from the rear side of 35 Brentwick Close. As Mark mentioned, it's only moved to 57 Titchfield Park Road. However, the bungalow is now re-sited to more fully towards the rear of our house, and in addition, there is a bike shed and a bin storage area, and this covers the full side of our garden, resulting in lost amenities. To reiterate, development this close would mean that we will not be able to enjoy our garden. Secondly, there isn't sufficient distance between the side of our house and the proposed access path. This is about 1.2 meters, and as this was always designed to be a cul-de-sac, not a driveway. This again contravenes the planning guidelines, which states sufficient distance must be left between the building and the proposed access driveways. The following objections are quite common to some of our residents, which are as follows. Currently, the road serves as turning point for 6 houses in Brentwick Close and one of our parking space. Furthermore, there will be no provision for visitor parking space, and the proposed access is going to put significant strain on the resident parking and blockages for the council vehicles and emergency services. This is not a high-quality design and fails to respect the character of the neighborhood. The frontage is not much more than just a door hidden in the Brentwick Close, and the flat-roof bungalow clearly fails to match the character of this area, where we have only 2-bed or 4-bed detached houses. The other thing is, of course, this is in the middle of Brainley Close and Fernway residence, and this is a loss of privacy for both the houses in Fernway and also to the bungalow itself. So this is affecting more than 10 households, and we are very dissatisfied with having to object over 5 times regarding this application. We vehemently and respectfully oppose this backyard development. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Ramsden next, please.
Good afternoon, I'm David Ramsden, I live at 7 Fernway and I'm objecting to the planning application. On the issue of siting and massing, the design guide SPD recommends a minimum separation of 12 metres for a single-storey building. Contrary to the submitted plans, our garden measures 9.8 metres, therefore the siting of the dwelling does not meet the minimum recommendation. Mark's report states that the dwelling would not have a negative impact on the amenity of 7 Fernway. This is not the case. There are large oak trees with ticos to the left and right of the garden that already create a sense of enclosure. A dwelling so close to our boundary will have a negative impact and create an even greater sense of enclosure, especially considering the main living areas are at the rear of the houses in Fernway. To put this into perspective, I provided some photographs. It should also be noted that the majority of houses are built garden to garden to ensure an open outlook and to negate the sense of enclosure and loss of light. Again, I provided a screenshot from Google Earth. The dwelling will be shoehorned into what was once a residential garden, a site that is totally unsuitable for development. As a result, the dwelling would be overlooked on all aspects by existing houses on Fernway, Titchfield Park Road and Bramwood Close, and would offer no privacy for any residents of the dwelling. There are no local amenities. The nearest shop was a 6.5-minute walk, but closed in April 2015, with planning permission for its replacement being refused. Public transport has recently been reduced, and we all heavily rely on our cars. On the issue of design and construction, the design is unsympathetic to the area and is unsightly. Existing houses adjacent to the proposed dwelling on Fernway, Titchfield Park Road and Bramwood Close are 2-storey houses with pitched roofs. The proposed dwelling is a bungalow with a part flat roof and mono-pitched roof. Existing houses are of brick construction, whereas the proposed dwelling makes use of timber boarding and render and is therefore out of character. The proposed dwelling also features a brick chimney, and no other adjacent houses have chimneys. On the issue of overdevelopment, as of Monday 25th of April, Rightmove lists 65 properties for sale with a minimum of 2 bedrooms within a 1-mile radius of the site. Cramming a bungalow into the site is not necessary for the area and adds to the local sentiment that this is blatant excessive development and garden grabbing. Other issues to be raised: having a north-facing garden, the garden is often wet throughout the majority of the year. As per Mark's report, land at the proposed site is slightly higher and the land falls away to the south towards Fernway. We therefore have concerns regarding drainage and water runoff. In conclusion, I strongly object to the planning application for the reasons mentioned and those included in the reasons submitted online. This is the 5th planning application submitted for this site. Each time there have been around 10 objections from local residents. It's quite clear from this that local residents feel this is overdevelopment and not sustainable. Thank you.
My name is Caroline Gould from WG, the agent acting on behalf of the applicant. The scheme that is before you today represents the culmination of a design process which has evolved from the original proposals for a 2-storey dwelling with 3 or 4 bedrooms to a more modest single-storey 2-bedroom dwelling. The larger dwellings originally proposed were criticised by officers in terms of their siting and massing, as well as their perceived impact on the character of the area, amenity of adjoining properties and the adjoining oak tree protected by a TPA. The applicant has taken on board these comments in designing the current scheme and has worked hard with officers who are now recommending support for the application. The principle of the proposal is acceptable, with the site located in the defined settlement boundary and the development of rear gardens not precluded by the NPPF or the development plan. The adopted borough design guidance advises that backland sites such as this may need a bungalow solution to be acceptable. The contemporary design is an appropriate and sensitive response, providing a single-storey dwelling with flat and monopitch roof sections to ensure that it is low profile and to reduce its scale and massing. The existing dwellings in Brainwood Close display some elements of contemporary design, and the proposed dwelling is therefore in keeping with the characteristics of these adjoining properties. It is our view that the proposed dwelling is excellently designed and will make a positive contribution to the built environment in this location. The proposed dwelling has been resited to address the site access, overcoming this previous concern. The required separation distances from the nearest adjoining dwellings are met, and the reduction in scale and massing compared to the previous schemes ensure that the proposed dwelling will not have a significant impact on adjoining residential amenity. The amendments to the location of the parking and turning area and the provision of an acoustic fence and boundary landscaping ensure that the scheme will not have any adverse amenity impact. There is sufficient space on site for visitor parking. The Council's tree officer does not object to the current scheme, with the resizing of the proposed dwelling ensuring that it has sufficient usable garden and providing increased separation from the tree, enabling the Council to defend any unreasonable future pressure to significantly prune it. Once WIG were appointed as agent on behalf of the applicant, we wrote to local residents inviting them to contact us to discuss the application and offering to consider suggestions for reasonable amendments to the scheme that may help to address any concerns that they may have. To date, we have not received any responses from local residents, and officers do not recommend any further amendments to the scheme. In conclusion, the proposed development overcomes the Council's previous concerns and accords with the relevant provisions of the MPPF and Development Plan. These points are confirmed in the officer's report, and we hope that you'll be able to adopt the recommendation to support the application today. Thank you for your time.
I think Bala and Mr. Ramsden have done my work for me. I think their deputations literally said everything I want to say, but I'm still going to repeat it. So, this planning application, in my opinion, is contrary to many of our principles that are set out in our core strategy. And you will see I have been studying it, it's all marked up. I know that infilling is more kindly looked upon, but I'm sure you will agree with me that any plan, whether it be infilling or an ordinary application, needs to be sympathetic to its surroundings and to its neighbours. But in this case, I think it's like squeezing a quart into a pint pot. The plot in question, as you saw on the plans, is at the end of the garden of 59 Titchfield Park Road. Because of the sensitivity of the site, I understand the applicants, and I've just listened to the deputation from the applicant's agent, they have worked closely with the planning officers to come up with a design which could be acceptable. Previous plans have been rejected or withdrawn. I am, though, of the opinion that this site is totally unacceptable for infilling. The design does not accord with the key characteristics of the area, i.e. it is bungalow style, which is not represented in either Fernway, Brainwood Close or Titchfield Park Road. And again, in my opinion, it doesn't represent a sustainable development, as though the proposed property has been moved to the rear of the site, any future owners or tenants would not have an adequate standard of sunlight, daylight and wood, because of where it is, be very reliant on their car. I also note from the report that the applicant is proposing to erect a 1.8 metre acoustic fence along the southern boundary of 35 Brainwood Close, and this is to mitigate the impact of the development on his rear garden. Again, I just think this shows that it's just not suitable for very obvious reasons. I'm sure you've all read the letter signed by the local residents dated 22nd of April. I think they've done, like the deputies, all the work for me, setting out the reasons why this application should be refused. But I'll just quickly pick up on a couple of points which I think are very relevant. CS17. This refers to high quality design. I submit this is not the case and goes against our principles in respect to design. Part of the design shows us a flat roof. These, in my opinion, are not only ugly, but not in keeping with the area. The site layout plans show that the proposed bungalow is not 12 metres from Brainwood Close, but appears to be only 10.5, and Bala brought that up from the lounge windows and the 2 bedrooms of the property. Again, I think this goes against our guidelines. The application has been relocated and the bungalow pushed down the end of the garden from its original plans, but basically I think this has moved the problem from one part of the site to another problem, and anyone living in the proposed bungalow would be seriously overlooked by the houses in Fernway and in Brainwood Close. Lastly, and this is mentioned in the report, and I'm not sure it's really a planning matter, but I put a question mark over it, whether the developer can legally use the existing footpath to be able to gain access to this development. As I understand that the residents in Brainwood Close still have issues with the developer, which has gone into liquidation. I know I've rambled on, but I do think that I would ask you please to refuse this application for many of the points that I and the deputies have raised. I don't think it would add anything to that particular area. I think it would look quite ugly. Thank you.
Just a couple of points at the minute, and then I'll pass back to you. Reference has been made to the proposal not complying with the separation distances in the design guide. My interpretation of the 12.5 metre separation requirement is about 2-storey buildings rather than single-storey buildings and their relationship to other properties. Mrs Hockley's final point with regards to the access, the applicant has undertaken to serve notice on the relevant organisation to enable us to consider the application. So as far as being able to carry on and determine the application, you're able to do that. And that, I think, are the only 2 points I need to make at the moment.
One of the deputies mentioned the access width not being suitable, too close to his house.
Chairman, you can see the access in the photograph there. The width is wide enough to achieve vehicle access in and out. In terms of how it relates, I think he mentioned 1.2 metres, I think, or 1.2 metres was the distance between the house and the edge of the access drive. You'll notice that there is an existing wall alongside his garden, and the proposed acoustic fence sits on the right-hand side of this fence, and then will wrap round to abut the wall in terms of trying to mitigate any activity along the access. The applicant's noise report sets out that the activity associated with a dwelling of this size wouldn't cause enough noise to give concern or cause impact to amenity. But notwithstanding that, they're offering to put the acoustic fence up as a bit of a belt and braces approach to deal with, I think, our previous reason for refusal. So the issue of impact on that garden, you had no objection previously on the withdrawal scheme from your environmental health officers with regards to noise. There's no highway objection previously either with regards to the suitability of the access.
And the design and the character, regarding the character of the area.
Chairman, my arguments about design, I think, are set out in the report. The applicant has undertaken a design exercise to try and deal with most of our reasons for refusal with regards to amenity and trees, and also to align the dwelling now so it faces up northwards towards the Branwick Close access point. There's a number of different designs in the area. Branwick Close, both ends of it. If you go north, the design's a bit more traditional. Fernway is traditional 2-storey. There is some render in Fernway. I think the front face of number 7 is rendered, even though the rear elevations are faced with brick. There's bungalows along Titchfield Road, Titchfield Park Road, and bungalows as you come into Fernway on the south side. All these different designs are available in the local area, but they're more directly visible perhaps on the application site due to its slightly more concealed location. So in my view, it's not imperative to reflect the 2-storey form of that surrounding, especially when you consider your recently adopted design guide says backland development may be appropriate as bungalows. And similarly, there's no serious harm arising from a more contemporary design in my view. Chairman, the western garden is 13 metres building to boundary. And it's 12 metres wide, north to south, in this location. It scales at about just about 5.5 metres to the edge of the proposed hedge. So that will mature. The actual boundary is beyond that hedge, but the garden layer will be about 5.5 metres. Fairly similar dimension, I suggest, the other way. 7 metres the other way, from the edge of the sort of patio to that southern boundary.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I totally disagree with the application as it stands at the moment. One question I'd like to ask of our officers: when the development was actually done in Brainwick Close, that development around there, looking at the side of 35, there looks as if there could be 2 car parking spaces. And I know very often on planning applications, when you get a cul-de-sac end like that, it's either itemised as a turning part or for 2 car parking spaces. I'd like to know whether in that planning application, when it was approved, whether that was set aside for 2 parking spaces.
It's not parking. The approved plan have it as a turning space.
The plan has a turning space, right, thank you. I think that the actual design of the building is totally out of character for the pictures which we've seen around the site. Yes, there may be other designs around the area, but looking at what is surrounding that site, that building is totally out of character for that. I think that certainly the 10.5 metre distance, though it may be a single-storey building, is below what we would have expected. Quite honestly, 12 metres is what we expect as a minimum. And when you look, 12 metres is not very far. I just can't accept the application at all. I think it's totally out of character and it's totally wrong in that position.
I'm a bit confused now on the figures. The report says, as far as 7 Fern Way is concerned, that it's 12 metres from the rear elevation of Fern Way. The deputy said it was 10.5 metres, and they had a 9.8 metre garden. Right. So it actually is 12 metres. I mean, the problem about, if you look at both the Google Earth we've been given, and indeed the area plan, location plan, there are a lot of houses with exceptionally small plots around in Brainwick Close. And in a sense, this is a bigger plot than many of the plots in Brainwick Close. Obviously, single-storey buildings do have a bigger footprint. Out of character, I did actually go down Titchfield Park Road yesterday morning, and there certainly are bungalows, within a stone's throw, literally, of this. So I suppose the issue is, does it fulfil all our design criteria in terms of separation distances? I'm not sure there's an argument about overlooking from this bungalow because it's single story, and if you have a 2-metre high fence around, you can hardly overlook unless you're tall like me and jump up. So I mean, I don't like it, but I'm struggling to find convincing reasons for opposing it.
Right.
Thank you, Chair. Chairman, I think in all honesty, the only reason for refusing this might be on the impact on 35 Brainwick Close. I can't see any other reason for refusing it. And I think the question is that significant enough to refuse the application? If it is, I think we find it probably hard to find grounds to do so. If it isn't, then it must go through. But I think the plot is large enough to sustain this building, this bungalow. We've got to be free to have innovative designs at times. I don't think we can always say we've always got to have brick with a standard roof or anything else. So I think the question is impact on 35 Brainwick Close. At the moment I'm still not sure if that's enough to refuse it.
Sorry, Chairman, I think what Councillor Swanborough has just said was exactly the words I feel, but and I'm finding it very difficult to find a good reason to refuse it, actually.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Actually, I must admit, to me, I don't find the design unattractive. I think the design is fine. However, in this area, it clearly is out of keeping with the surrounding properties. But that in itself may be quite okay from an NPPF point of view. We have many discussions over back garden development, and generally speaking we're not too happy on back garden development. And from that point of view, this particular back garden development I think is worse than many of the ones we see. Essentially impacting a number of properties, whereas normally there's only one or two properties that are impacted. However, as the point was just made, whether the degree of impact is such that we can refuse, I doubt. I'm not happy about taking up what is essentially everyone would have thought would remain forever cul-de-sac and driving through in that area. I think the property itself might suffer a little bit from overlooking. It clearly will not overlook others, but in itself it might because of the numbers that surround it. But along with Councillor Swanborough, having said all of that, I simply don't feel in sympathy with the application. I do not think we have sufficient reasons to refuse it. So I will go with the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Chairman. I was surprised that there wasn't more about the tree, and that's not the overshading of the tree, but more the roots of the tree. That the building here, we've had trees, and I think if you remember an oak tree in Park Lane a while ago that was impacting on a house that was 30 metres away, and I think we agreed it should be taken down. Because my memory says, correct me if I'm wrong, that the roots of an oak tree go out a long way but are shallow. So I'm surprised that mention hasn't been made that the impact that building might have on that, but it hasn't. I think views are the same as others. I'm not sure about the design. The flat roof design is odd. I think our guidelines, as it's been said that bungalows in an area such as this would be acceptable. The flat roof looked odd, out of keeping with perhaps the immediate surrounding areas, but I'm struggling to find reasons, sound reasons, why we could refuse it.
Yeah, I think design, we've done a lot of work on design recently. This looks to me like a brick garage with a shed attached. I'm not being unkind to the architect, but it may be in keeping in some places. The other thing that disturbs me, if there was a bungalow there at the moment, and we wanted to surround that bungalow by two-storey houses, we would say that development was overbearing and out of keeping and many other things. What we're doing, we're creating a situation, in my view, where that building is being overlooked and in an overbearing situation. So far as the tree is concerned, when we were working on the design guide, I understood that gardens that were overshadowed by very large trees needed a much greater amenity space than those that weren't. In this case, the tree may not be in the garden, but the canopy of the tree looks as though it overlooks, is over probably a third of the usable garden, which makes it questionable whether that amenity space is usable or not.
Anybody else? I'm happy, Councillor Weber.
No. I'm not happy with the design, but I think there's been comments all the way round the table that has indicated indicated all of the issues. I will then, as you've asked me, I will ask one question. One of the deputies made a comment about drainage. Now, has there been any problem in that area so far? Because this can only exacerbate.
Chairman, I'm not aware of any drainage issues. When the deputy made that comment, I've had a quick look at the application form, and surface water is to be dealt with by sustainable drainage system, probably in the form of a soakaway. Capacity, porosity, etc. Is to be dealt with during the building regulation approval process. And foul waste, they're proposing to connect into the main sewer.
Mr. Chairman, can I just come back again on design? I think that, you know, as I said earlier on, is that when you look around that site, you look at basically conventional type buildings in design around, and then you plonk something like this in the middle of it. It's a totally different design, different character, with one part of it being a flat roof, one a very sloping roof, and it isn't. And the face of one side of the building is in wood compared with brick, and it doesn't really fit into the character of the area. So to be quite honest, and my opinion is that CS17 of high design is not satisfied, in my opinion. Also, if you look at the side of 35, where the question I asked is that was it set aside as parking spaces within the original approval for that area, the answer was no. But I bet a pound to a penny that it is often used for parking, and therefore will reduce the amount of parking available from within that estate area, and that will create other problems. So to me is that it is trying to, I think if we look back in the number of backlands that we have approved, where we've approved bungalows, we've looked at more conventional type of bungalows, and yes, they have been small and they have fitted in. I don't believe that this does fit into that particular site on that basis, is that we talk about the distance between number 35 and the building, and nobody has really denied that it is not 10.5 metres. The deputy said that's what it is. Our officers haven't denied that to be so, but other than the comment that he looks at the 12 metres as for a two-storey building to two-storey building. Now, just because it's a bungalow and you've got that close to your amenity, just does take it out of character. And to me, that on those 2 points alone, this should totally fail. And I think there is strong enough evidence to actually not to approve it on those 2 grounds alone.
Sorry, Chairman. Looking back at the type of property it is and whether it is in character, probably hangs on a statement in Mark's report, and I don't know if this has been taken from the applicant or whether these are Mark's words. The proposed bungalow draws on some of the contemporary architectural designs in Granite Close. I don't know if those are your words, Mark. Could you explain some of those contemporary designs then? Because that might say that perhaps it is somewhat in keeping with other properties.
Chairman, they're my words. What I've done is when I've walked around, I've had a look at Bramwell Close, and whilst it's a traditional 2 stories, you can see there are things like there's glass surround to the doors, there's some painted brick, there's elements of render. There's glass canopies which have got metal braces. All that is slightly different to your more traditional timber porch canopies that might have braces underneath. Little flat trays or pitch trays over the front door. So that is little detail like that that's led me to think in some form of contemporary architectural solution may be workable in this particular location. Those are the sort of the smaller details that I've teased out, and I think picking up on one of Councillor Evans' points as well, there's the support for this in terms of not stifling innovative design in the MPPF as well.
Thank you.
Can we have a look at the other elevations here, please? I do agree with Councillor Landry. It looks like a garage with a shed attached.
I think, from a point of looks view, it's what you call innovative design. It's not horrific. I mean, I've seen plenty of buildings similar design, probably much larger, but in design terms, I don't have a problem with it. And it's not exactly, it's facing a street scene of any sort, is it? It's facing the end of the cul-de-sac, surrounded by other housing.
You can't help but see it, you drive down there.
If you're going to drive down there. I'll see it down there. I personally don't have a problem. I think what it's doing, it's designed because the original schemes were too big and bulky. And what they're trying to achieve here is something that's going to reflect daylight, so hence render rather than brick. It cuts the bulky view. The roofs might not be acceptable in a lot of senses, but again, the roofs aren't pitch roofs, so it's taking away any overlooking or daylight problems, etc. I don't have a problem with it. I think it fits in there quite reasonably. Anyway, anybody else want to make a comment before we make a decision? No?
Just a question, Chair, which actually, I must admit, isn't terribly relevant. But, what is a Palmer deck seamless roof? What is that? Some material I don't know of?
It's a construction brand, I think. As I understand it, when you've got your timber sort of underlaid to the roof, it has a resin sort of, or glue effectively put down, then it's a sheet, form of plastic sheet, I think, that sits over the top, that effectively seals the roof. But Permadeck, I think, is a specific brand, but it's a mean of having a watertight roof covering.
So it should outlast something like normal, whatever it is, normal roof covering.
It's what they treat flat roofs with these days, the old traditional one with chipboard underneath, and before you say enough, it's all collapsing and pouring water through. This is a much later, better approved scheme. Right, well, we have a recommendation there. Do I have any contrary recommendation from anyone? No? Okay. Right, can I have a proposer and a seconder for the recommendation? Proposed by Councillor Evans, seconded by Councillor Cartwright. Those in favour, please show. And those against? 1. That's permitted.